For more on the president's address, Major Garrett is at the White House, and CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill. Major, over to you first. The president used the address to tout the accomplishments of his first year in office, as well as his administration's plans for the future. But what didn't the president mention during his speech?
Well, plenty of things he didn't mention. Obviously, Russia, the Russia investigation he didn't mention. He also didn't talk about Afghanistan, where, let's remember, just a few months ago, the president said he had a brand new strategy, the first of its kind, and then would turn around the stalemate in Afghanistan that previous administrations had lived through. Well, that new strategy isn't altogether that new, and it's not producing new results at all. As a matter of fact, 3 Taliban attacks, deadly ones, in the last week and a half illustrate how difficult that war ahead is for the United States and for Afghanistan. The same internal struggles beset the Afghan government, and the Taliban appears just as eager to inflict carnage in Afghanistan to prove its point that it's not going anywhere as it ever has. So the president didn't mention that at all. And he also, when he talked about North Korea, talked about the regime itself and its internal disposition toward those within its own country, and that it's a threat not only to them but to the United States, not drawing nearly as much attention to the building conflict over its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile technology, but the way it treats its own people, trying to change the orientation of administration to that issue. But the most important part of the way this speech was structured was to take the president out of it. And why did the White House do that? Because they know congressional Republicans in midterm elections are going to have to deal with the reality that lots of voters want to send President Trump a message because he is personally unpopular. So you make the speech not so much about President Trump, but about Americans who represent either the policies ahead or accomplishments achieved. And by that, for the first time, President Trump is trying to take himself out of a presidency that up until now and up until last night has been all about him.
So, Nancy, the president referred to his immigration plan as a down-the-middle compromise. Here's what Congressman Joe Kennedy III had to say about it during the Democratic rebuttal. Let's listen to that.
This administration isn't just targeting the laws that protect us. They're targeting the very idea that we are all worthy of protection.
So some would say that the president has an argument. He's offering a pathway to citizenship, mentioning it for dreamers, but he's also plans on scaling back legal immigration. You might call that a middle-of-the-road compromise. Do you think this plan, what we know about it so far, will get bipartisan support?
I think it's fair to call it a middle-of-the-road Republican proposal in the sense that some moderate Republicans think that the president's immigration proposals are too aggressive, and some conservatives think they don't go far enough. Democrats say that a couple of the things that he wants to include in that plan are simply non-starters, and they are very opposed to, in particular, his proposal to limit family-based immigration, to say that legal immigrants would no longer be able to sponsor a sibling or an adult parent or an adult child. They say that that would cut legal immigration by 50%, and some Republicans have the same concern. They say that that is simply too big of a change to the immigration system to fit in what they believe should be a more narrow bill to create some kind of legal solution for this dreamer population. However, there are also a number of Republicans who say, but if you don't do that, how can you ever hope to get House Republicans in particular on board? They will simply balk, and now it sounds like the White House may balk if those aggressive reforms are not part of the package. And so when you talk to lawmakers here on Capitol Hill, they all see 5 or 6 different ways that this could play out, and some of the results include getting a bill, and some don't, because this is an issue that has bedeviled Capitol Hill for decades.
Major, last night when the president was entering the House chambers, he had a conversation with Congressman Jeff Duncan of South Carolina, and I just want to play a little bit of that sound for our audience so they can hear it, and then let's talk about it.
Sure.
Let's release the number. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine? Yes, sir.
All right. So the president responding to the question or the statement by the congressman, release the memo, the president saying 100% don't worry. What does that signify? Can we expect that the president will, in fact, release this memo?
Well, based on that conversation, and we love the hot mic moment for any American president, certainly that one was to be treasured because it suggests the president's already made a decision about something that I was told here yesterday at the White House is an ongoing process involving several relevant agencies, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the National Security Agency, and the Department of National Intelligence, the Director of National Intelligence, rather, all looking at this memo and deciding whether or not, A, it should be released, if it should be released, in what form, should there be heavy redactions of some of the information in there, or should the memo be withheld, but some of the information that was used to build the narrative of that memo be declassified. So you take it out of a memo drafted by Republicans only, show the underlying declassified information that led to some of the conclusions, but take the conclusions from Republicans out of it and let the public make up its own mind about what that declassified information actually represents. All these things are options, I was told here yesterday, in what was described to me as a thorough review process. Now, I was also told yesterday the president had not seen the memo, but his reaction, which was spontaneous and maybe absolutely legitimate, suggests he's going to put it out there no matter what. What I'm told is, and what I reported yesterday, is there is going to be a recommendation. It's scheduled to reach the president's desk this afternoon. And no release of this memo, remember, drafted by House Republicans on the Intelligence Committee, will be forthcoming any earlier than Thursday. So if all that I was told about the internal process is true, the president's remarks suggest he may have already made a decision, but I do know there's an internal process that is going to have to come to his desk, and the same result may apply, or the president may reconsider. I know there are voices within this White House who very much want him to reconsider.
You know, Nancy, Joe Manchin from West Virginia was on CTM earlier. He was asked a question about whether or not he felt the memo should be released. He said absolutely not. We know the intelligence community is opposed to having the memo released as well. I want to get your take on this hot mic comment that it certainly seems like the president would like to see the memo go public.
Well, and interestingly, it has now been reported that Congressman Devin Nunes of California, who is the chief instigator behind pulling together the intelligence that ended up in this memo, he was asked point blank by one of his Democratic colleagues on the House Intelligence Committee whether he had worked with the White House in crafting this memo, and he sort of hemmed and hawed and eventually said, well, I'm not going to answer that question. And that is just providing more fodder for Democrats who say this is a political document designed to undermine the investigation being conducted by the special counsel, and at the very least, if it's going to be released, that it should be released alongside a Democratic memo 10 pages long rebutting what is inside this 4-page intel memo. The challenge is that 4-page memo has been around for a few weeks. It has now been vetted by the Intelligence Committee, by House Republicans. As Major pointed out, it's been examined by the FBI and other federal agencies. So it's sort of further along in the process. It's ready for release. This new House Democratic rebuttal is not. It still needs to go through that process. You do have some Democrats saying, look, maybe we should just get it out there. Then we can argue against it. We can make our points, and it doesn't continue to have this mystique, this mystery about it, about the intelligence secrets contained within that indicate that the FBI somehow committed malfeasance when it started surveilling some of these members of the Trump campaign in the first place. Some Democrats say, you know, you might as well just put it out there and then we can deal with it and maybe it'll go away fairly quickly.
Nancy, before we let you go, just looking ahead now, moving away from the speech, GOP lawmakers are going to be at a retreat in West Virginia. They'll meet with both the president and the vice president there. So what will be the focus of those few days following the president's address? What will they be talking about?
Well, ostensibly they're there to talk about their strategy, their policy priorities over the next year, but it's going to be impossible to avoid the #1 topic that is sort of weighing on all of them right now, which is immigration and what exactly to do about these so-called dreamers, because the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, has promised that he is going to put legislation on the floor in a little over a week for debate and possibly a vote. And there are multiple groups on the Hill right now crafting their own legislation, claiming that they themselves are making a great deal of progress. But can they get enough support among their own members? Can they get enough support from the other chamber? And what is it exactly that they're crafting? You know, not only do they need to strike some kind of bipartisan deal, but then they need to put it into legislative language, which can take time. And so this is an incredibly pressing problem, and it is something that lawmakers have not had that much time to discuss across the aisle, because last week the House was not in session. This week you've got all the pomp and circumstance of the State of the Union, which sort of captivates everyone for a couple of days, and now House and Senate Republicans are leaving town for 3 days. So how do Democrats and Republicans sit down and work through some of these issues? There was a big bipartisan group in the Senate yesterday that met for a couple of hours. They felt good about that progress, but it's just very difficult to continue to make progress when you're not sitting face to face.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Major Garrett at the White House. Nancy Cordes, you are on Capitol Hill. Thanks a lot, guys.
You got it.
You're welcome.